Hello class, we are group 7 and today we will be presenting the case study entitled From an Apparent Failure to a Success Story, ERP in China Post-Implementation. Our team members include Michael Moreno, myself, Ashley Elliott, Christopher Leake, and Viviana Williams. Before we go into the questions that we'd like to address, I'll provide a quick summary of the article. This article is a case study that discusses the unsuccessful implementation of a French multinational corporation's enterprise resource planning project and its Chinese subsidiaries. Many features of the ERP template did not fit in the Chinese context, therefore the Chinese users worked around the misfits by inventing their own solutions known as workarounds. After careful analysis, the French consultants recommended to their headquarters that flexibility was key in ensuring that the project would not fail. Once the headquarters understood the magnitude of the failure, they decided to implement subtle changes. The first being the installation of an SAP 4.6 Charlie to support Chinese characters. Despite the subtle changes, the French team quickly realized that the root cause of the issue was the people factor. From the Chinese user point of view, the ERP system was impeding proper execution of the local organizational activities. This article dives further into workaround types and how French consultants teamed with Chinese subsidiaries in an effort to save the project in its entirety. This presentation will cover 4 topics for our group discussion. The first is how the project adapts to the culture of China. The next is the critical relationships issue, the critical issues that were compounded in this article, what the workaround was and what does it mean, and then the lessons that can be discovered for U.S. project implementation. So the first question that we'd like to address is adapting to the culture of China. How did the French business do that? Really, the Chinese versus European business culture are very things that we can talk about, but I will just address a few. The Asian and European business cultures have unique differences that can impact business relationships if they're not clearly understood. This article touched on a few of the nuances that occur between French leaders and Chinese subsidiaries. For example, the case study touched on French counterparts continuously talking down upon Chinese managers in front of their subordinates. An acceptable practice in Europe, maybe, that can leverage accountability, but a brutal show of shame to a manager in Asia who internalizes this ridicule as a shot at his or her character or even honor. In this case study, the French group adopted to the culture of China by first remaining flexible in the ideas and needs of the Chinese subsidiaries. This flexibility catered to the Eastern expectation of forming close relationships to build trust and loyalty on a personal level before engaging in business directives. A second thing that the French nationals did was include Chinese project managers in every aspect of the decision-making process involving the noted workarounds. This inclusion derailed the initial take-it-or-leave-it attitude of the French headquarters. The inclusion bridged the major differences in business customs, such as relationship management, where in the European culture is more inclined to a form of individualism, while the Asian culture is more collective and caring. And 2, the business challenges, where the European culture is very candid in presenting opinions, while the Asian culture is very passive-aggressive to ensure that no one loses face over an opinion. This ultimately resulted in the 21 formalized workarounds, which will be addressed later on in this conversation. Next, we will discuss the critical issues of the case.
Thank you, Michael. There are many critical issues highlighted in this case. I will briefly overview the critical issues, and then Chris will take us through the workarounds. This case highlighted that the overarching issue in this case was a disconnect between organizational, cultural, political, and economic influences that led to problems in the implementation of the ERP project in Chinese subsidiaries. For example, the first issue highlighted was that of linguistic factors. There was no Chinese version of SAP at that time, along with communication difficulties between the French head office and the Chinese subsidiaries. These Chinese consultants had poor English and little experience with Western companies. Additionally, there was limited employee involvement due to poor communications. Local employees did not feel involved. They felt as though only top management seemed concerned with this project. Other differences included cultural differences around attitudes and values related to control, management, and communications. A key example of this is that in Chinese culture, it is important to not lose face, which happened as Chinese managers were criticized in front of their inferiors. Other differences included varying laws at different Chinese sites, while the system assumed standard regulations. Overall, this implementation was seen as, quote, heinous, naive, and even disrespectful to the Chinese values. It was seen as one of many failures of Western countries implementing information systems in China. And now I'll pass up to Chris to discuss the workarounds to resolve these issues.
Thanks, Ashley. There were 3 categories of workarounds implemented by the Chinese business segment of the multinational conglomerate. Data adjustments, which occur when system users create their own alternatives to system coding. Procedural adjustments, which occur when local adjustments are made to business processes or procedures. And parallel adjustments, which occur when a system is run concurrent to the target system. Now, this sometimes does occur legitimately as validation measured in new system go-lives. There were several instances of each of these categories of workarounds, 64 of them in fact, and the breakdown was something like this. There were 35 data adjustments, 19 procedural adjustments, and 9 parallel adjustments. So here are some specific examples of these workarounds that were implemented by the Chinese. First, and this was an example of a data adjustment, the ERP was implemented with 30, 60, and 90-day payment terms. However, in China, it's customary to pay 1/2 of the yearly payment of all invoices in that period. To get around this, the Chinese simply created a custom payment terms code. Unfortunately, this code was recognizable only to the Chinese and wouldn't have been recognizable to others within the organization. So the second example is that of a parallel and a process adjustment around the value-added tax. In China, local taxes change with some regularity and may also vary from industry to industry. Moreover, Chinese regulations demand detailed tax reporting criteria to combat fraud. Also, the tax calculations are complex and quite different than those typically encountered by the European system designers. In this scenario, the complex tax calculations were carried out in Excel since they were not supported by the ERP. Therefore, we have an example of 2 software systems being used to carry out the work that should have been carried out by the ERP alone. The third example is that of a parallel procedure adjustment in that the sales team in China was limited by how much they could spend on customer appreciation gifts. To get around this, to get around the thresholds that were enforced by the ERP, the sales folks discovered that by aggregating a series of smaller gifts rather than a lump sum gift, they could get around the limitations set by the ERP.
Hello everyone, my name is Viviana Williams and I will be going over lessons learned for U.S. project implementation. We found 5 and they are 1. Careful planning and brainstorming are necessary when dealing with implementation and use of the ERP. Managers and users should not be blinded or become over-optimistic towards the adoption and usage of the ERP. 2. The role of the IT manager is important to the success of the ERP. Therefore, the ERP manager must be an experienced IT manager who is strong in programming, have ERP knowledge, and project management skills. In other words, be able to manage user resistance, resolve department conflicts, and promote changes resulting from the ERP use. 3rd, across-the-board analysis of the organizational needs. Detailed specifications of user requirements should be identified, analyzed, and documented. 4. In order to ensure continuous success, we feel that top managers should consider ERP as a long-term venture rather than short-term. In other words, funds should be able to be assigned to ensure cost-effective ERP maintenance and enhancement. 5th, apply efficient change management techniques to ensure that the new business model is being adopted by users in a day-to-day operations.